All right. Good evening, everyone. I see folks starting to trickle in here. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Hope those that are hailing from California are staying dry and warm. Had quite the chilly storm coming through. I'll kick it off here by introducing myself. My name is Matt Sharp Cheney. I'm a wildlife ecologist 3 with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, and I'm the lead mammologist here at MidPen. I'm in the Natural Resources Department. And from here, I'll just give a quick introduction to our topic and then walk us through who MidPen is as an organization before we introduce our key speaker. So as you can see, we are talking today about wildlife photography with Vishal Subramanyan. And this is a project that I'm really excited about and have really enjoyed working with Vishal on. And he's going to talk about several very interesting and unique species that occur here on the San Francisco Peninsula in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And some of the efforts that he's taken to capture compelling imagery and behavior with these unique animals. From here, we'll go ahead and move on to who MidPen is. So we are a special district that was put together by voter initiative back in the 70s, back in 1972. And we preserve more than 70,000 acres throughout the Santa Cruz Mountain bioregion. And our mission really is to connect a green belt of suitable habitat across those 70,000 plus acres and across the Santa Cruz Mountains themselves. So we have a couple of mission statements. Our primary mission statement is acquiring and preserving that regional green belt of open space land in perpetuity, which means forever, to protect and restore the natural environment and provide opportunities for people to come out and enjoy those spaces. And on the San Mateo County coast, we have an additional mission component, which is to secure and preserve the regional agricultural heritage of the San Mateo County coast, which we do by working with many local ranchers with our conservation grazing program to enhance grassland habitats. So here's a quick map just showcasing the lands that we protect. And you can see it runs along the ridgeline as far south as the Sierra Azul region with a little tiny snippet of Santa Cruz County. And then we are also have preserves throughout Santa Clara and San Mateo County, including our newest preserve, which is Cloverdale Ranch out on the San Mateo County coast south of Pescadero. And next up, it's time for me to introduce our key speaker for the evening. So Vishal Subramanyan is an award-winning wildlife photographer, a National Geographic Young Explorer, and a storyteller that's dedicated to connecting people with nature through the power of images and words. His work has been featured in National Geographic, CNN, NPR, CBS, Smithsonian, and the Los Angeles Times, and his photographs have earned recognition in prestigious competitions, including the Wildlife Photographer of the Year. As a freelance conservation storyteller, Vishal collaborates with leading organizations such as Cal Academy of Sciences, UC Berkeley, Peninsula Open Space Trust, and us, MidPen. Through photography, public speaking, and exhibitions, he inspires communities to take action on conservation and climate. A recent graduate of UC Berkeley with degrees in ecology and statistics, Vishal combines scientific insights and creative storytelling to highlight the urgent challenges facing our planet. He has a growing audience of over 100,000 followers that reflect his ability to spark wonder and foster a deeper human connection with wildlife. It's been an absolute joy working with Vishal to capture the incredible wildlife of MidPen preserves. And we're very thrilled to have him share that creative process and inspiring journey with all of us today. So please welcome Vishal Subramanyan.
Thank you so much for the awesome introduction, Matt. It's been really amazing to work with MidPen over the last year. And yeah, today I'll just share some stories from some amazing wildlife experiences I've had photographing for MidPen for the last year. So yeah. So Matt already did an amazing introduction, but a little bit about me. I'm a recent UC Berkeley graduate. I'm a professional wildlife photographer and storyteller, and I'm a National Geographic Young Explorer and an Osher Fellow at the California Academy of Sciences. And what my job is to take pictures of wildlife. And I do this through partnerships with a variety of conservation groups. So some of the groups I get to work with, as Matt mentioned, are California Academy of Sciences, Peninsula Open Space Trust, the California Wolf Project out of UC Berkeley, and of course, Midpen. Now, I grew up going to Midpen Reserve, searching for wildlife and just enjoying the outdoors. So it's been a real full circle moment to do professional work with Midpen right after I graduated college. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got interested in wildlife and wildlife photography. So from a young age, I'd been exploring the hills of the Bay Area where I grew up, photographing animals like these otters, weasels, badgers, and bobcats. And it was these experiences with wildlife at a young age that really inspired me to pursue a career in conservation photography. So since graduating college, I've been fortunate enough to work with Midpen and other organizations to do exactly that. And today I want to talk about some of the awesome projects I've gotten to work on with Midpen, highlighting the wildlife we can find here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, the conservation concerns they face, and how a rapidly changing landscape is impacting these animals. So some of the projects we've had the fortune of working on are on coyotes, bats, badgers, and mountain lions. And I'll start off by talking about coyotes and the threats they face from rodenticides in urban adjacent parks. So this was a coyote I photographed in Rancho San Antonio Preserve. And you can see it's found right on the wildland urban interface. This is where nature goes up against the urban edge, and the things we do here in these urban environments and in our local neighborhoods can impact wildlife in reserves like Rancho San Antonio. So here, coyotes live in really close proximity to people. You can see this one just crossing the trail a few feet in front of a jogger, and this other coyote howling over here. And I want to talk about one specific encounter I had where I saw a coyote interacting with a biker in one of these preserves. I watched one evening as this biker came up along the trail. The coyote went and stopped right in front of the biker. Then an interaction came after where the coyote actually started following the biker once the biker had passed the coyote, almost as if the coyote was waiting for this particular individual to come by. The coyote started following the biker, and it actually wasn't until the biker chased him away and eventually threw a stick way out into the distance that the coyote eventually left and stopped this interaction. But the throwing the stick and seeing how the coyote almost went running after the stick. Next slide, please. Was a really weird interaction to witness because it almost seemed like this coyote was playing fetch, or perhaps it was just maybe thought what the biker was throwing was food. But in any way, it goes to show these really interesting and human interactions that can happen in landscapes like this, where coyotes and humans regularly come into close contact with one another. Next slide, please. And another interaction we see in these landscapes between coyotes and people is when it comes to rodenticides. So over here, we can see this coyote eating a gopher that it just caught. But the thing is, in areas like this that border up against neighborhoods, a lot of local neighborhoods and businesses use rodenticide poisons, which work their way up the food chain, impacting the rodents, which thereby impact the coyotes and other predators that eats them. Next slide, please. So over here, we can see the really very real impacts of rodenticide. So the image on the left, you can see a healthy coyote. In the image on the right, you can see a coyote with some pretty serious mange. Now, the relationship between rodenticides and mange isn't always the most straightforward interaction, but a lot of studies have shown that when an animal consumes rodenticides through their food, it weakens their immune system, making them more susceptible to the mites that cause mange. So mange is not always caused by rodenticides, but it's a very it often rodenticides often can and do result in mange. And in Rancho San Antonio, coyotes and foxes have tested positive for rodenticides, making it very likely that rodenticide is causing horrible mange in these animals like these coyotes. Next slide, please. There was one evening in particular where I photographed this pair of coyotes, and one coyote you can see is in a little bit better shape, but the other one is really sick due to mange. And when they have this mange, they lose a lot of their fur, which makes them more vulnerable to the elements, and very often it can lead to their death. Next slide, please. And this image was captured to show how these coyotes living up against the edge of urban environments like this puts them at specific risk of these rodenticide exposures because animals don't understand these park boundaries in the way that we do. They frequently will travel in and out of these fences into bordering lands where they are more at risk from the toxins that we put in our environment. Next slide, please. This was just some more photographs of the pair, and these were really hard photographs to take, and it was something that was really difficult to witness, but it was important to capture to show how these animals are being impacted by these poisons. Next slide, please. And then this is a video of one of the really unfortunately sick coyotes that we captured. So the goal of this part of the project was to show how these wildlife are being impacted by rodenticides and what it means when coyotes, share the landscape very closely with humans. And these photographs and videos are used as part of MidPen's outreach, educational materials to bring awareness to this issue. And MidPen does amazing work in connecting with local communities to bring awareness to this issue and advocate against the use of rodenticides. Next slide, please. Now, one of the other projects we got to work on was on badgers. Now, badgers are a species of special concern here in California, and they're very elusive and difficult to photograph. They face a lot of threats from roadways, which have been like a barrier to their movement, and they frequently get struck by vehicles. And they also rely on rangeland and grassland habitats, which are a really important habitat to conserve and protect. And Midpen conserves a lot of these habitats in the skyline region. Next slide, please. So the approach we chose to use for photographing and filming badgers was camera traps. Now, a lot of us are probably familiar with this game camera, or also known as a trail camera, which is a really good way to capture elusive wildlife and record data. But so I set up about 10 of these cameras in the skyline region of Midpen to try to capture these badgers on camera. And the next slide shows what we were able to capture. So first, before we were able to set out the cameras, we needed to look for badgers' burrows, so fresh badger activity like this, because when you're camera trapping a lot of animals, you put cameras on trails and roads, which wouldn't be as effective for badgers because, they really rely on their burrows. So we were looking for fresh badger sign to set the cameras up on. And so we started off this effort by placing trail cameras out on the fresh burrows that we could find. So our trail cameras captured a lot of amazing badger activity. And what we could clearly see that there was a pair of badgers, one with a missing eye and another one. And now that we captured, the area they were moving and different kinds of behaviors, I wanted to get some high quality photos and videos. So that's when I turned to my go-to technique, which is DSLR camera trapping. Now, DSLR camera traps involve a lot of the same technology of like a normal trail camera, but it's just at a little higher level. So you're using an off-camera motion sensor, off-camera flashes, and a DSLR camera with the wide-angle lens to capture high-quality pictures of wildlife both day and night. So once we'd scouted out these locations with the trail cameras, we set up these DSLR camera traps to get more footage of the badgers. Next slide, please. So this is what one of these setups looks like in the field. You can see there's a lot of moving parts, and everything needs to be really precise because the moment the animal steps into the focus point, the camera needs to trigger. So if it triggers too early or triggers too late, you're going to miss the shot. So to make sure that something like this works properly, you need to test the focus and make sure it's triggering at the right time. Next slide, please. So what this means a lot of the time is crawling around like a mountain lion or a bobcat or a badger to see that it's triggering at the right time. And now this might look silly, but it's a pretty important part of the process. And I actually have way more photos of me crawling around like a mountain lion than I do of actual mountain lions. Next slide, please. But this is the technique I've used to get photographs like this of a mountain lion. And now I wanted to use it for badgers. Next slide, please. So this is what one of our setups looked like next to one of the badger burrows. And after just a few days, we were able to get the footage we were hoping for. Next slide, please. I was really thrilled to be able to capture this footage of the badger almost right away and, show it in the context of its landscape, the grassland habitat that it relies on. This is some footage of the badger at night with the classic kind of face covered in dirt as badgers do. Sometimes I wish I could be like a badger. They seem to just really enjoy digging, rolling around, and it seems like they really enjoy life. We also set up some still cameras for the badgers, where we were actually able to capture images of both individuals just a couple of hours apart. And In this case, identification of the individuals was pretty obvious because of the missing eye, but in a lot of cases, these higher quality photography techniques really help us identify individuals of different species. And I've had it personally be very helpful before for identifying individual mountain lions. Next slide, please. Now, working on the badgers was really fun, and another species I had a lot of fun working on for Midpen was bobcats, which are my personal favorite animal. This is a bobcat photographed on the camera trap at the exact same location of the other two badgers from the previous slide. Next slide, please. But this was the bobcat photo I was really after for most of the project. Now, I wanted bobcats, like coyotes, are really vulnerable to rodenticide poisons which cause mange. And there's been a lot of research out of Southern California showing a really strong link between rodenticide consumption in bobcats and mange. So I wanted to capture an image of a bobcat that really showed this urban landscape and environment that they live in. So I wanted to get this photo of a bobcat with the city lights. And this was also a location where badgers had been known to come by, so I was thinking getting either of them here would be great, but it ended up being the bobcats that came by really often. And this is out overlooking San Mateo County, and this image kind of captures what the reality is for a lot of wildlife. They do live on these urban edges, and they are impacted by that. So that was what I was really trying to show with this photo. And a photo like this can actually be captured in a single exposure where the flash freezes the movement of the animal, and then the camera shutter stays open to gather in the city lights like you see over here. Next slide, please. I also spent a lot of time photographing this young bobcat in Rancho San Antonio Preserve. Now, Rancho San Antonio had a really big mange epidemic with bobcats over a decade ago, and a lot of the bobcats disappeared from the park. When this youngster showed up, I was really excited to see that, but also concerned about its future in a place where animals are really vulnerable to this. I spent a lot of time watching this bobcat as it hunted and rested near trails. Definitely one of the most adorable young bobcats I've seen. Next slide, please. And this bobcat was hunting a lot of rodents. So what I was trying to show was how rodenticides work their way up the food chain to impact animals like this young cat. Next slide, please. And eventually, after spending hours and hours with him, I finally got a photo of a successful hunt where he caught this vole over here. After this, I didn't see the bobcat too much, and I hope he's doing well out there wherever he is, but I really hope he can stay safe from rodenticides. Next slide, please. He was also rather silly, kept on getting into trouble with the deer. Now, these images were taken from far away, so they're not the best quality, but it was really funny in the next slide to see the deer chasing the bobcat. And on multiple occasions, I watched him get in trouble with the deer, and it was just always hilarious to see. It seems like he never learned his lesson. Next slide, please. Um, and if there's one symbol for wildlife conservation and connectivity in the Santa Cruz Mountains region, it's probably the mountain lion. So I wanted to get some high quality photos of mountain lions for Midpen in one of their largest reserves, which is Sierra Azul. Next slide, please. So I worked with the Santa Cruz Puma project to set up camera traps on this old dirt road that had a lot of mountain lion activity. Previous data from the Puma project showed that they were walking by this road often, and it was a really good place, a proven spot to set up cameras to capture high quality photos of mountain lions like these. Next slide, please. We immediately captured multiple different individuals, and in the one in the previous slide, I could identify by the ear, which was a little cut out, making it really obvious that it was a separate individual. On one occasion, although my pictures weren't good, I got a video of mountain lion and two older cubs walking by. Next slide, please. After doing photos there for a while, I set up a video setup to get this mountain lion walking through the darkness on the road. And I slowed it down so we could see the leaf litter being kicked up by this mountain lion as it navigated this road. And the nice thing about camera traps is they'll photograph any animal that comes by. So I was also fortunate enough to capture this pair of gray foxes on a regular occasion, including in the daytime, which is something I don't see too often with gray foxes. Next slide, please. And I was also fortunate enough to capture this skunk. Striped skunks are one of two skunks that occur on mid-pin preserves. And while I tried photographing the other, much more elusive one, which is the spotted skunk, I didn't have any success with that one. Next slide, please. Now, the last main project I want to talk about was probably the most challenging and the most rewarding of all the projects. And that was working on the pallid bats. Next slide, please. So back in the spring, I got to go inside the barn with mid-pen biologists and got to see some of the bats that call the barn home. This includes the Townsend's big-eared bat on the left, which is a California species of special concern, and the pallid bats on the right. Now, this is the only known maternity roost for pallid bats in the San Francisco Peninsula, making it really important habitat. And as the state bat and a species of special concern, we wanted to tell a story about these bats using this barn and the important ecosystem services they provide. We also wanted to collect data through photography on these bats. Next slide, please. But we were faced with a logistical hurdle almost immediately. So after the spring ended, we got into maternity roosting season during summer. And to avoid causing any disturbance whatsoever, we didn't photograph the bats at all during that time period. But when a month after maternity roosting season ended, because we wanted to leave a good buffer, we wanted to photograph the bats as they emerged from this window on the barn, which was one of their main emergence points from the barn. And this immediately provided like a lot of logistical challenges. How do you photograph bats flying out of a barn that's 20 feet above the ground? So my dad and I devised this photography setup, which involves using these poles and lifting these poles, putting a camera and flashes up on the poles and lifting it way up into the air to get eye level with the bats as they emerge from the window. It was pretty much like a bat camera trap. There was a high-speed sensor inside the barn that would capture the bats as they flew out and then trigger the camera. It would capture exposures all night, thousands of them, and maybe a few hundred of them would have bats in the frame. Next slide, please. But through these photographs, we were immediately able to learn some really cool things and capture some really cool imagery. So one thing we found was that the pallid bats love to emerge in pairs like this. And it's thought that this is a predatory defense mechanism, strength in numbers. And on a majority of the images, I saw pallid bats emerging in pairs like this. Next slide, please. And I was always really happy when I could capture synchronized poses with the bats, where their wing poses just happened to match exactly right when the frame was captured. Next slide, please. And these are just some more of the images of the pallid bats that we were able to capture. And in the image on the left, I was really trying to show that they're relying on these human structures. So, you know, things that we think might not be that important for wildlife can actually be really important for a really special species like this. Next slide, please. And this was one of my favorite images where we were able to capture an exactly synchronized pose of the bats. But this image also gave us really valuable scientific data. Now, it might be difficult to see here, but if you zoom in, you can see that these bats are actually banded. And these bats were banded in this area nearly a decade ago by Midpen. And these photos confirm that the bats were returning to this site almost a decade later, which was a remarkable site fidelity, especially considering that the lifespan of these bats is only around a decade to begin with. So it was really great to get some verification that these bats were continuing to use the barn year after year. Next slide, please. This was the most bats I ever got emerging in a single frame, which was 4 of them. And just goes to show how many bats there are using this structure. Next slide, please. On really rare occasions, I was lucky enough to get photos of multiple species of bats in a single frame. Over here, you can see 2 pallid bats emerging at the same time as a Mexican free-tailed bat, which is clearly a much smaller bat. Next slide, please. And we ended up capturing a total of 4 different bat species in the barn. So 4 out of the 5 that used the barn. And those include these Mexican free-tailed bats, which is what I showed in the previous slide. Next slide, please. These Townsend's big-eared bats, which are another species of special concern. And in this photograph, you can really see those huge ears, which give them their name. Just a really fascinating species, one of my personal favorites. Next slide, please. And we also were able to capture these Myotis bats. And these are another pretty small bat. Next slide, please. So that concludes the projects I worked on with MidPen, and I got to work on a lot of amazing different species and different preserves, and I'm really grateful to have had that experience and contribute to MidPen's goal of preserving this green belt of land and the wildlife that call it home. Some of the other projects I'm working on right now include wolf photography in Northern California, working with Peninsula Open Space Trust to document wildlife in redwood forest landscape, small mammals, documenting California small mammal diversity with the California Academy of Sciences, and a bobcat film with the National Geographic Society. Next slide, please. And I'll let Matt take it from here.
All right. Thank you so much, Vishal. Really excited to see that bobcat film when it comes out. I can tell you're very passionate about that species as well as many others that you talked about tonight. And on a side note, I also sometimes wish that I were a badger. It does look like fun. So I just wanted to wrap things up a little bit here with just adding some additional context around some of the concepts that Vishal talked through. And some of these compelling images that he captured that can really help us emphasize these stories that are happening out here on the landscape in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And one of those is, of course, our effort at MidPen to help reduce the impacts of rodenticide poisoning on wildlife. And Vishal mentioned that we have had several instances of mortalities from bobcats, coyotes, and even gray fox at Rancho San Antonio that did test positive for multiple rodenticide exposures, including the really nasty second generation anticoagulant rodenticides that are very, very hard on wildlife that ingest rodents that are exposed to them. So what have we done to try and impact this? Well, the image that you see here is a map that we've been using for outreach, and it essentially shows the home range of both bobcats and coyotes centered around Rancho San Antonio, which is one of our most popular preserves by far. And it's also right along that wildland-urban interface that Vishal mentioned. And so these sort of idealized home ranges just show that these animals, especially coyotes, that have a larger home range and are actually very highly adaptable and able to persist in highly urbanized environments. Even if you're not a neighbor directly to Rancho San Antonio, the actions that you take on your home may impact these and other wildlife. So the animals travel outside of open space and into urban areas, and even the rodents that get poisoned can travel a distance and end up in these open spaces as well to impact these predators. So we give people a lot of information by both tabling in preserves and also sending outreach information to neighbors to talk to them about effective alternatives to the use of rodenticides to manage rodent populations. And these include things like securing your home so that there are no access points for rodents to get in, vegetation management around your home so there isn't really good habitat for these rodents to persist, and then cleaning up food sources that could attract rodents and also attract these other creatures like coyotes, things like fruit trees dropping fruit, or if you have a dog or a cat that you feed outside, that might attract a coyote to come around. And then offering up that manual traps are a better option to actually help protect our local rodent control experts like coyotes, bobcats, raptors, that actually can naturally limit these rodent populations that we have. We've also supported several pieces of legislation that limit the use of anticoagulant rodenticides here in California. that have large impacts on those non-target wildlife. And we ourselves, with our integrated pest management or IPM program, have a non-chemical first approach where we are not using any kind of chemical treatment. And this goes for both management of invasive plants and rodents that are non-native that may be impacting some of our facilities. So we also, are practicing what we preach, so to speak, and we are utilizing manual traps and securing structures rather than going a chemical route. And then, of course, we monitor and coordinate with Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife. When we do have instances of mange, we let them know. And when we do, unfortunately, have mortality events, we send those off to the wildlife investigation labs to get results so that we can actually understand, what caused these mortality events. Was mange just something that is going through the population, or is there an underlying root cause like rodenticide exposure, which unfortunately is often the case. Next slide. So I also am a huge fan of the Townsend's big-eared bat. Picture shown here where it kind of looks like a giant bunny rabbit, or I guess a tiny bunny rabbit. And Vishal mentioned the importance of some of these artificial structures for Townsend's big-eared bat in particular, but also pallid bat and a list of other species that rely on these man-made structures because they have really great thermal regulation properties. Bats like to go inside for the same reason you or I like to go inside. It's a nice, stable environment. You don't have to worry about getting wet from the rain. And it's a good place for bats to do things like raising their pups, their young, or to hunker down in the winter and go into what's called a torpor or a long-term hibernation. And so some of the images you see here are two types of structures that we have either built as freestanding structures. So the funny little green and white boxes are these freestanding structures. These are out of Bear Creek Redwoods. And then the other structure below is actually a modified carport, a historic carport at Bear Creek Redwoods at Alma College that we modified to support bats, including the Townsend's big-eared bat. And we successfully got these bat species to utilize these structures. And as far as we know, this is the first time there's been a successful mitigation structure for Townsend's that has actually attracted them and become useful as a roosting structure for the species. So we've been sharing that out with other partner agencies, and hopefully some other people will emulate that. But I also want to emphasize that the management that we do and preservation of over 70,000 acres of open space land is where the majority of our work to support bat populations comes from. So most of the bat species that we have utilizes a lot of our forest habitat as really great roosting locations and places for maternity roosts. We just tend to find them a little more easily in structures, so that gets a little more attention. But all of our bat species, there are about 16 that call the San Francisco Peninsula home, can be found in our open space preserves, either roosting or foraging. We also do acoustic monitoring with the North American Bat Monitoring Program to have basically a census of bat species composition, and that's across North America, including Mexico and Canada. So we're one of many, many organizations that contribute data to that long-standing data set. Next slide. We talked about badger, the creature that likes to roll around in the dirt and can just swim through the soil. Amazingly adapted for fossorial or underground lifestyles. And Vishal did a great job of talking through how at threat our badgers are due to habitat connectivity loss and fragmentation. And you see here in this map, this is a linkage analysis that MidPen put together, looking at how badger might be moving between these tiny little pockets of existing grassland habitat. And really, it seems from our work on badger in the last 5 years that we have very small populations that are very genetically isolated. So most of the badgers we find are related very closely to each other. And that's not good news for the persistence of a species long term. So we're looking into improving connectivity between these grassland habitats, enhancing these grassland habitats where they do exist, and then protecting badger where we find them. Next slide. And then lastly, I want to mention mountain lion, which Vishal got some fantastic photos of. And the recent listing decision by the Fish and Game Commission has basically listed this species, mountain lions, in central coastal California, including the Santa Cruz Mountains, and Southern California as a threatened species under the California Endangered Species Act. That means that they have special protections. And when an organization like MidPen or any other publicly funded agency wants to implement a project, they need to consider impacts to mountain lions when they're putting that together in what's known as a CEQA document, California Environmental Quality Act document. And so we're actively following that. We actually supported the listing status, and we work very closely with the Santa Cruz Puma Project to understand how mountain lions move throughout the landscape in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And also, we're looking into several different areas of research, including the human mountain lion interaction study, which looks at factors that influence how lions interact with people. We're looking at wildlife and livestock protection research that looks at strategies for mitigating any potential conflict between livestock or domestic animals and mountain lions. We also have what's called a wildlife picture index, which is an array of cameras. This was out at Rancho San Antonio that can give us an idea of how many mountain lions there are when compared to how many deer there are. So it's sort of like a density estimate that compares the number of individuals relative to each other, not the number of individuals on the whole. Bit nuanced there, but that's a very exciting project. And then the one that I really want to emphasize here that's the most important for the long-term conservation of our local mountain lion population is the Highway 17 wildlife crossing that we're working on, which is currently planned for a location just north of Lexington Reservoir that will help facilitate movement between the northern Santa Cruz Mountains and the southern Santa Cruz Mountains, and hopefully beyond to the Diablo and Gavilan Range. Our mountain lion population is relatively healthy in terms of the number of individuals. About 50 to 60 adult mountain lions is the current estimate from the Puma Project. But they are also suffering from very poor genetic diversity and inbreeding depression. So the lions that we have need to get out and need to mix with other populations, and those other populations need to get in order for our mountain lion population to persist. So that Highway 17 crossing project is a really important one. And with that, I will just give another huge thanks to Vishal. And I also want to give a shout out to Natalie Jolly, who's working in the background on this and running things for us from our public affairs team. Did a great job. And of course, huge thanks to everyone who joined in today. I hope you found this as interesting as I did listening in. I'm always trying to pick up photography tips from Vishal. And the video will be available later on YouTube. And with that, we'll kick it over for questions. Okay,
Yeah, so
we got one. Oh, yeah. All right, we got one popped up. I guess I'm planning on just saying them out loud, and then Vishal and I will tackle them. So the number one is, does the camera flash impact wildlife? Go ahead, Vishal.
So that's a really great question. It's definitely something we think about every time we approach a specific project or a specific species. My experience has been, so I always set these flashes, high up at a low power. So, they have not impacted most animals that I work with. And specifically animals like, mountain lions, bobcats, a lot of the wildcat species I work with have often showed no interest or attention in the flashes at all. That being said, like when we're working with special status species and species that could potentially be more sensitive, we think a lot about how, to use them or if we use them at all. So for the badgers, for example, they didn't show any concern about the flashes, but when denning season approached, we took down any artificial lights just to be on the super safe side to make sure, their well-being was priority. And for the bats, in the period after the maternity roosting season, we did a full month of infrared photography with no visible lights before we switched to visible lights, just to create that buffer for them to following the maternity season. So it's definitely something we think about as we approach every project. And yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Matt.
No, you covered it really well. I'll just say that we coordinate with organizations like Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife to make sure that they're on board with the approach that we take for monitoring these wildlife with the camera traps. And then we've also reached out to many experts that have done similar work, photographing bats in particular, what I'm thinking of currently anyway, which was extremely helpful to just have the insights from people that have done this in the past. Yeah. All right, next question. How many camera traps have you set up with MidPen, and how many camera traps in all of your projects combined together?
That's a good question. So for it's too many. I have too much camera gear. But if so for MidPen in particular, I was using two DSLR camera traps and one mirrorless video camera traps with three high quality setups. And I have a grid of about 30 trail cameras that I rotate between projects. So I was using those for MidPen as well. And overall, like I said, I've got about 30 trail cams and about 15 high quality DSLR slash mirrorless setups that I use across my projects.
All right, next up, what was the most insightful wildlife behavior that you captured?
There was definitely a lot of really interesting behaviors, but if I had to pick one, it would be the bat roost emergence. Just because, we learn so much by having the cameras up there, collecting data on bats in a way that isn't typically collected for bats, and seeing how they would often emerge in these pairs and, the likely predatory defense mechanism that involved was really interesting. And just so many of the images were of, these pairs of bats, which is something I didn't expect. I expected to have a lot of single images of bats, but I actually rarely had any. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Matt.
Yeah, the bats really stood out for me. I love bats. They're very near and dear to my heart. So that one's tops for me, especially finding the banded individuals from, I think it was almost 10 years ago, as you mentioned. That was really exciting, showing that persistent use. And then the other one that I'll also just point out is the interaction that you got between that individual with the coyote at Rancho. That was just a very interesting behavioral interaction, and to me it really showcased what I would actually like to see from preserve users if a bold coyote is approaching you. And the reason for that is that person who reacted in that way was actually essentially telling that coyote, people are dangerous, don't approach us like that, this could go very badly for you if there was an attack. And effectively trying to change that bold behavior to keep the coyote safe and keep our preserved users safe. So that's another one I'd highlight. Oh, I see another one in the comments here. Oh, okay. Yep, there it is. What's your most challenging camera setup?
It was definitely the bats. Out of all projects I've done, not just for MidPen, figuring out, how to get a camera 20 feet up in the air, definitely not easy. And then it was also challenging, figuring out whether to keep it inside the barn, outside the barn, sensor placement, all of those. And I really feel like I think did a decent job this year, but I think I have ideas on how to improve it for a future bat photography project. Just because there's just so many different logistical challenges in that one. And there was one other particular challenge with that I'm trying to remember. But yeah, definitely the bat project. And yeah, I've had quite a few challenging setups, like one where I wanted to get mountain lions kind of on this at this pond, and I wanted to get the reflection. So my friend made this setup where the camera was hanging upside down and we could get it a few inches above the water. There was a challenging setup way up at like, 14,000 feet in the Alpine where it's just rocks and nothing else, so not much to mount on. But the bats take the title.
Ooh, and then follow up on that one. What was your favorite photo or most rewarding footage from the project?
That's hard. I'm gonna say two. So I would say one is the daytime clip of the badger emerging from the burrow, in the it's I love getting footage of them in the daytime just because it's something we don't see too often. And I definitely didn't expect to get it on my high quality camera trap. So that was a really awesome surprise. And the second one would be the one of the photos of the pallid bats emerging from the barn where you could just see like the corner of the red barn in the frame. And it was one where they had an exactly synchronized pose, which I always found really interesting. So yeah, those are the two that I'm gonna have to choose.
Can I choose one too? I didn't take
Yes,
these photos,
absolutely.
but yeah, I think the one that you got of the bobcat with the cityscape in the background was fantastic. I want that as my background on my computer. It's great.
That would have been my number three choice.
Perfect. Excellent. All right, so that concludes our presentation today. Thank you all so much for being here and for tuning in. Vishal, huge thanks. This is a blast. I can't wait to continue working with you and also just to see what you do, what you document next.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to work with MidPen, and I'm excited for the projects we can do in the future.
All right. Likewise. Thanks, everybody.